Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's indeed a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for Cotswolds. He is a great parliamentarian and serves with distinction along with me on the Public Accounts Committee, and it was good to hear from him. For those of us, Madam Deputy Speaker, who have been in this House for a number of years, we feel it's like Groundhog Day or déjà vu. We have seen it all before. The difference in this budget, though, is that usually after a general election, the Chancellor has to dole out its medicine and the British public, who have just voted the government in, have to take it. The difficulty this Chancellor faces is he has to please all people of all persuasions. I have no doubt when he fed to the media that he wanted to reduce the VAT threshold for businesses, he was put off by when he looked towards his Irish colleagues. I am sure the freeze did not come out of economic prudence, but political necessity. But I have to say, this speech is no different to any that we've heard before. It begins with a number of lame jokes, which I'm sorry the Chancellor is no comedian. Who did not see that joke about cough sweets coming a mile off? I'm sorry, but it's no laughing matter. The elephant in the room for this budget and the previous budget has been Brexit. In the previous budget, the Chancellor only dedicated a few lines to Brexit. This is the most seminal moment in post-war British history. We are leaving the European Union. Now, the Chancellor said early on in his speech the Prime Minister has set out a clear vision. Well, I must be the only one who does not know what this vision looks like. Actually, all we have seen is the Chancellor saying they put in £3 billion towards any consequentials of what could happen in Brexit.
I thank him for giving way. Does he not agree with me that, in fact, the simplest thing that the Chancellor could have done to support business would have been to announce here at the dispatch box that he's going to keep the United Kingdom in the single market and the customs union?
Well, at least I would have liked to hear some sort of plan about the single market and the customs union. I think, and I will say this, and I diverge if you will allow, Madam Deputy Speaker, those of us who are concerned about Brexit and about getting the best possible deal have been attacked unfairly by opponents as remoaners when simply we want to get the best deal for this country as we leave Brexit. And what is so interesting, as we've seen £3 billion put aside for Brexit, we have heard nothing from the Chancellor about £350 million per week for the NHS. Perhaps the Chancellor wants to drag the Foreign Secretary here to talk about where that £350 million is, because I haven't seen it. And while he's doing that as well, perhaps he wants to talk to the nurses. I give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Patrick Minford has worked out that if we move to free trade, the £350 million will be available for the NHS, but only after we've left the European Union, which hasn't happened yet.
I think the honourable gentleman, I respect him as a parliamentarian, but I believe he is wrong on this. He knows that was shall I say, a false statement made by the Leave side that tried to con people into voting that way, and he knows that. And there is no point in standing by that anymore. But the one thing is, we heard nothing about Brexit. All we heard is this is not going to be a budget dominated by Brexit. Well, I'm afraid the Chancellor is wrong. Every budget from here on in will be dominated by the consequence of leaving the European Union. And so the budget went on and on and on. We had terms which the Tories would love. A strong government. We will be resolute in our determination to bring about a strong economy. Yet tucked away, it took 8 pages before we got to the real story of this budget. Quite simply, productivity growth is down and is continued to fall. This is the first Chancellor who has stood before that dispatch box and has said the growth will be below 2% since World War II. That's something he should be proud of. It gets worse. It's 1.5% in 2017. 1.4% in 2018, 1.3% in 2019 and 2020, and hopefully picking up to 1.5% and then finally 1.6% in 2022. At the same point, debt will be at its highest level it's ever been. And there, the government is being over-optimistic. And if we're not going to talk about Brexit, at least talk about the fundamental weakness in our economy. It is productivity. Productivity has failed to return to pre-crash levels and doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. The OBR has revised its estimates of Britain's long-term productivity gains and economic growth. They claim this means Britain's economy will not bounce back from the financial crisis, and output per worker probably won't recover to its pre-crisis rate of 2.1%. Our productivity crisis will mean larger budget deficits in future years, a downgrade in productivity and therefore depressed earnings, which will mean future tax revenues will take a serious long-term hit. The downgrade creates a £20 billion black hole in the UK's public finances, according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies. We cannot hide this problem anymore. Now, if the government wasn't so timid, if the government wasn't so scared of its friends from Ireland, I'm sure we need radical solutions. Things have not worked. We cannot go on all the time with this rhetoric that things are going to improve. We have to take action, and that action must be taken now. For me, the most fundamental error that this government, since it came into power, has made in 2010 is its failure to get to grips with the banking system. We need to boost business investment through a network of regional banks. Germany has thousands of banks, including vibrant state-run and cooperative sectors, many focused on lending specifically to small and medium-sized businesses. In Britain, just 5 banks hold 85% of all current accounts. The Chancellor could learn from the German model by enabling a new generation of mutually owned building societies and savings banks that focused on driving long-term investment rather than short-term dividends for their shareholders.
Might the Chancellor not also rethink the future of the Royal Bank of Scotland? At the moment, the government is committed to privatising that at some future point in the medium-term future. But surely, taking the opportunity to set a future for RBS as a mutual, perhaps the Royal Building Society of Scotland might be a better way to encourage competition with the other Big Four players in the banking market.
I think my honourable friend speaks from experience as the chairman of the Cooperative Party, and he is absolutely right. We need a thriving cooperative sector in this country. And again, if we want to talk about the past and talk about the reason we haven't got a strong mutual sector in this country, is because of the raiding the Tory government of the 1980s allowed on many of our banks. And the most famous of those is Bradford and Bingley, allowing people to become members and then turn them to PLCs. And look where that got us. We need a fundamental reform of this government. Equally.
Does he agree with me that one of the worst decisions of the Conservatives in the 1980s was the destruction of the great regional institutions that were building societies? So the great organisations like the Leeds Permanent, like the Halifax Building Society, which created wealth and retained it in the regions, were destroyed.
I absolutely agree with my honourable gentleman. If ever that was tearing at the very fabric of British society, then that was it. I think it is terrible that we walk down the street now and we see so many famous building societies that we grew up with are no longer there. And that needs to be changed, and we need to start talking about alternative cooperative models. Or as business finds it more difficult to lend from traditional areas, then we need to talk about more mutual sector and more mutuality in our society, in our business, including employee share ownership schemes and other things. But I think as well, as time forbids now, I have to talk about the NHS. Our nurses do a fantastic job. They're at the front line. When someone is in need, they are there. But very often, this government has not been there for them. And still today, instead of giving the nurses a pay rise, which I think all of us agree that they deserve, what we got was a very vague statement about maybe, if and but. That is not good enough for the most vital service workers in this country. And I think too about all those people on universal credit. Again, this is all about a sop to those who are in need. It should have been an announcement today to pause it, look at it and eventually change it. It is no good in plunging the most vulnerable people we have into abject poverty. But this is what this government is about. This government, I feel, is very good at warm words. And of course, every Chancellor's speech has to end with a flourish. And we've seen it there, the waving of the papers, the cheering, as the Chancellor stood up and in his uninspiring tones, announced that he was going to abolish stamp duty for those in for houses worth 300,000. He said, oh, that was going to help millennials onto the housing ladder. And then straight away, within minutes afterwards, which has happened in all his speeches, last time it happened with national insurance contributions, we get the real story. Hidden away on page 154 of the OBR report, it states clearly that the temporary holiday on stamp duty will increase house prices by 0.3%. And the Honourable Gentleman for Spelthorne is shouting at me, the Honourable Spelthorne is shouting at me, judging by the ability of the OBR to predict the future, does he honestly think that they're only going to go up by 0.3%? I don't. It might come down. Hopefully the Honourable Gentleman there. But the point is, the Chancellor is missing that many of these people can't afford a deposit to buy a house. So really, he should have been looking, as well as reducing stamp duty, some vehicles so people could save to buy a house. Now, we've already heard about the Home Buyers ISA. Many people didn't take it up. But there's those type of things that we need. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've spoken for a long time, taken a lot of interventions. But I will say this. This was a speech where the Chancellor was boxed in. He held up his red box, but that was a symbol of how he was boxed in. He was boxed in by his government, he was boxed in by the Democratic Ulster Unionists, and he was boxed in by his party as well. We are now, in terms of Brexit and in terms of the productivity problems we have in this country, we needed radical reform. That government can't provide it anymore. I say to them, stop clinging on to power and let's go back to the country.
Yes, I've got...
Andrew Mitchell.